Isn't it funny how we confuse love with obligation? How we think helping someone automatically proves our worth, when sometimes it only proves our blindness? You keep reaching out, giving, fixing, because that's the story you've been telling yourself about who you are. But what if the story is wrong? What if every act of help you think is kindness is actually just training you to repeat the same mistake? Sometimes the hardest truth isn't about her. It's about realizing that stopping doesn't make you cruel, it makes you sane. That your hands can stay still without guilt. Because letting go doesn't destroy love, it exposes reality. Helping blindly can enable harm, because what feels like generosity can easily become a leash. When you act without reflection, without observing consequences, without asking if your help is solving a problem or creating dependency, you're no longer assisting. You're scripting behavior. You think you're offering support, but in reality, you're teaching someone that their needs justify your overextension, their inability justifies your sacrifice, and their patterns don't need correction because someone else will clean up the mess. That's the paradox of blind help. It looks like kindness, but it fosters reliance and masks accountability. People often confuse their own discomfort with someone else's need. They see struggle and immediately want to intervene. I can fix this. I should fix this. I must fix this. The mind rationalizes intervention as love, as duty, as morality, and the heart celebrates, thinking generosity is the same as wisdom. But without boundaries, without pause, without assessment, that generosity isn't neutral. It's active participation in dysfunction. You become a cog in the wheel of repeated mistakes, a silent accomplice to patterns that don't need encouragement. Blind help also robs the other person of growth. Every time you step in without pause, without questioning, without holding them accountable, you take away an opportunity for them to learn cause and effect. Consequences are the teachers no one wants in the moment, but they're the only instructors that last. By preventing the natural outcomes of behavior, you deny reality the chance to instruct. You think you're saving someone from pain, but you're often saving them from learning, from responsibility, from seeing themselves clearly. The danger isn't just in what you give, but in what it trains. Every repeated intervention reinforces a pattern that someone else will fix it, that excuses are acceptable, that dependency is sustainable. You may feel noble, you may feel loved, you may feel needed, but the result is predictable. Repetition of behavior without consequence creates habit, and habit hardens into expectation. What you think is help becomes the blueprint for what must happen every time, until intervention is demanded rather than chosen. Blind help also erodes your own boundaries and self-respect. Every time you ignore the warning signs, every time you say yes when your gut says no, every time you prioritize someone else's discomfort over your own, you chip away at your capacity to act with clarity. It's not sacrifice that diminishes you, it's sacrifice without strategy, without awareness, without discernment. There's a difference between giving freely and giving foolishly, and ignoring. That difference carries a cost heavier than most people anticipate. You start noticing patterns over time. Requests become habitual. Gratitude becomes conditional. Respect becomes negotiable. And yet, you continue because stopping feels like failure. You tell yourself love requires endurance, that morality requires self-denial, that family requires compliance. But endurance without boundaries doesn't create loyalty, it creates expectation. Self-denial without assessment doesn't create respect, it creates habit. Compliance without reflection doesn't create harmony, it creates codependency. Blind help also blurs the line between compassion and control. When you intervene without reflection, you unconsciously shape outcomes. You make decisions for someone who could, in fact, make their own. You determine what they avoid, what they endure, and how they respond to challenges. You think you're supporting freedom, but what you're doing is orchestrating dependence. The hand extended in love becomes a lever, and the more you pull, the more leverage you give over the other person's growth and paradoxically over your own peace. Recognition is key. You must see that repeated patterns of intervention are not neutral. They're active participants in a cycle that keeps everyone involved from learning, from growing, from facing reality honestly. Your energy is finite and its direction matters. When help becomes habit without discernment, it siphons your focus from areas where it could create genuine change, from actions that could foster authentic responsibility, from choices that reinforce clarity rather than enable repetition. Every intervention carries weight. Every act of help writes a story, not just for the person receiving it, but for you. When you give blindly, you are authoring a narrative of expectation, dependence, and habitual reliance. You may feel justified, you may feel compassionate, you may even feel necessary, but necessity earned through repetition of unexamined action is fragile. It is not love, it is habit masquerading as morality. And that distinction is the fine line between helping and enabling, between giving wisely and giving blindly, between peace and chaos masquerading. As family duty boundaries protect both you and others, because without them, everything becomes a negotiation of expectation rather than choice. A boundary is not a wall, it's a map. It shows where influence ends, where responsibility begins, and where respect can exist without confusion. When you fail to define limits, people assume your availability is infinite, your tolerance is unconditional, and your involvement mandatory. That assumption doesn't come from malice, it comes from your silence, your hesitation, your willingness to stretch beyond reason. And once that assumption takes hold, both parties are trapped in a cycle that feels like obligation masquerading as care. Boundaries aren't punishment. They aren't withdrawal. They're declarations of reality. They say, this is where I stand. This is where I will act. This is what I will endure. Without them, generosity becomes a weapon turned inward. Compassion turns into exhaustion, and love becomes self-erasure. People confuse this with selfishness. But the truth is, boundaries are the architecture of sustainable care. Without walls to define the space, everything collapses under its own weight. You burn out, and the other person never learns the weight of consequence. Most people avoid boundaries because they fear conflict, confrontation, or rejection. They believe drawing a line will hurt someone's feelings, damage relationships, or make them appear cold. But the absence of boundaries hurts far more, in ways that are slow and cumulative. It teaches dependence, fosters entitlement, and trains people to ignore limits entirely. You think you're avoiding conflict, but in truth, you're setting the stage for deeper struggles later, ones where consequences are harsher and clarity comes with pain rather than choice. Boundaries also teach responsibility. When someone knows you have limits, they must navigate their own behavior. They can no longer rely on endless intervention or unlimited forgiveness. They must decide, do I respect the line or do I challenge it? In that choice lies growth. They learn to act within reality, not expectation. They learn that their actions have predictable consequences. They learn to see you as a human being with priorities, not a resource to exploit. Establishing boundaries is uncomfortable because it requires honesty. You must admit your limits. You must face your fear of loss or anger. You must resist the temptation to justify, over-explain, or soften the message for comfort. And yet, that discomfort is the point. Boundaries are not for your ease, they are for your clarity. For the other person's clarity, for the integrity of interaction that keeps patterns from turning toxic. People often mistake tolerance for love. They believe enduring chaos, absorbing blame, or ignoring manipulation is proof of loyalty. But tolerance without boundaries is fertile soil for abuse. It conditions others to expect compliance, to exploit patience, and to disregard your well-being entirely. Boundaries prevent that. They are the blueprint for respect, showing what you will allow and what you will not, and giving everyone involved a chance to operate within truth rather than illusion. Boundaries also preserve your energy. Every act of unchecked intervention drains you, subtly and cumulatively. Every unconsidered yes chips away at your ability to act strategically, to help effectively, to remain present without resentment, without limits. You give everything without direction. and your gifts lose their meaning. You are exhausted, resentful, and still blamed for not doing more. Boundaries prevent that by creating intention, by defining purpose, by making help deliberate rather than habitual. The power of boundaries is revealed in their consistency. Inconsistent limits are confusing, undermining, and ultimately ineffective. People will test what isn't firmly drawn, pushing to see how much can be taken. Firm, consistent boundaries, however, demand recognition. They force accountability. They clarify roles. They teach everyone involved where reality begins and where personal responsibility ends. Boundaries also communicate respect for self and others simultaneously. They say, I matter enough to maintain my limits. You matter enough to understand and navigate them. Without this clarity, relationships are guided by assumption, manipulation, and misinterpretation. With clarity, even difficult relationships can operate without repeated harm because everyone understands the rules, whether spoken or implied, through consistent action. Finally, boundaries are preventative, not reactive. They exist before chaos arrives, before frustration peaks, before patterns repeat. They prevent harm by defining space, preventing overreach, and cultivating awareness. They protect your energy, your clarity, and your ability to act effectively. They protect others by giving them the framework to navigate responsibility, consequence, and interaction honestly. And yet, most people avoid setting them, believing kindness requires sacrifice instead of strategy, and that love demands self-erasure instead of disciplined care. Repetition reveals patterns of manipulation because chaos never arrives fully formed. It sneaks in slowly, disguised as coincidence, as charm, as vulnerability, and as the familiar story you've been telling yourself about family, duty, and love. You think it's random, you think it's normal, you think it's unavoidable, but repetition never lies. The same demands, the same excuses, the same disappointment. Patterns exist to show you what your eyes refuse to see. And when manipulation is involved, those patterns are deliberate, precise, and exhausting in ways that feel personal but aren't. Manipulation thrives on forgiveness, on habit, on the assumption that patterns will be tolerated, and that's where repetition becomes the teacher. One incident can be forgiven, two can be rationalized, three can be explained away with love or necessity. But by the fourth or fifth time, repetition isn't coincidence anymore, it's evidence. Evidence that the same behavior is being enacted because it works, because boundaries aren't enforced, because consequences are absent. The lesson isn't subtle. It's a mirror held up to choices, showing the cost of ignoring reality. People ignore patterns because they want to believe in good intentions. They want to see a family member's flaws as accidents, misunderstandings, or bad luck. They cloak repetition in narratives of love, loyalty, and duty, think that because the intention feels noble, the impact doesn't matter. But manipulation doesn't care about your narrative. It doesn't ask for moral interpretation. It only seeks to exploit the gaps you leave open, the inconsistencies in your limits, the compassion you treat as obligation rather than choice. Repetition also conditions behavior. Every time a boundary is tested and ignored, every time a pattern is overlooked, every time intervention is automatic, the cycle strengthens. The manipulated learns that persistence pays, that appeals succeed, that disruption is temporary. Your energy becomes predictable. Your limits become negotiable. Your compassion becomes a weapon wielded against you, and the pattern solidifies. It doesn't stop until observation replaces hope, until acknowledgement replaces denial. The danger of repetition is that it disguises itself as normalcy. When the same behavior shows up over and over, the mind starts to normalize it. What once caused alarm becomes routine. What once felt disrespectful becomes expected. You start adjusting, excusing, tolerating, rationalizing. You tell yourself, this is just how things are. And in doing so, you become complicit, not intentionally, but by default. By allowing repetition to go unchecked, you reinforce the very pattern you wish would change. Manipulation itself is patient. It doesn't need drama to succeed. It relies on subtle influence over time, repeated small breaches of expectation, repeated testing of limits, repeated emotional nudges that erode clarity, and repetition makes detection difficult. It lulls you into thinking nothing is wrong until you realize the same cycle has been running for years, with consequences mounting quietly in the background. By then, the pattern feels too entrenched to challenge without disruption, but disruption is the only way out. People ignore repetition because it confronts them with choice. They see the pattern but hope that context will change it, that circumstances will improve, that the person involved will act differently if treated kindly enough. But kindness alone doesn't alter patterns of manipulation. Patterns are maintained by predictable responses, and as long as the response remains accommodating, the repetition continues. Recognizing manipulation through repetition requires detachment, clarity, and courage. Detachment to observe the pattern without emotional distortion. Clarity to see the connection between repeated behavior and your own responses. Courage to intervene, to set limits, to refuse participation in cycles that reinforce dysfunction. Without these elements, repetition remains a teacher that goes ignored, a warning that feels like coincidence, a trap disguised as routine. Repetition also exposes denial. People will say it's just once in a while, or they didn't mean it this time, or this one is different, and the next time, and the next. They use the same excuses until excuses run out. Denial is easy when patterns are familiar because familiarity softens judgment. But the truth remains unchanged. Patterns speak louder than excuses, and eventually reality intervenes where awareness has not. Manipulation through repetition is relentless because it doesn't need consent, only inaction. Each ignored signal, each excused behavior, each habitual intervention strengthens the cycle, and the person caught in it often doesn't realize they're participating willingly. They think love or loyalty requires endurance. They think family means automatic accommodation. They think compassion is synonymous with complicity. Repetition exposes these assumptions and forces the question, how much of what you do is truly choice, and how much is habit molded by manipulation? The clarity repetition offers is uncomfortable but necessary. It reveals the patterns you've ignored, the energy you've wasted, the consequences you've been postponing. It exposes where intervention creates dependency instead of growth, where forgiveness enables rather than heals, where involvement obscures reality instead of revealing it. And the first step toward breaking manipulation is noticing those patterns, naming them, and choosing differently in response, rather than continuing the same motions that have kept them alive. Guilt often disguises wisdom because it wears the mask of responsibility, morality, and love, convincing you that feeling bad is the same as doing right. It creeps in quietly after every refusal, every boundary, every moment. You prioritize yourself over someone else's endless demands. You feel it tugging at your conscience, whispering that by saying no, by stepping back, by protecting your energy, you are somehow failing them, failing family, failing love itself. And in that whisper, wisdom hides, waiting to be recognized beneath the weight of imposed obligation. Guilt is persuasive because it feels like an internal voice, intimate and personal, when in reality it is often a learned response to manipulation, expectation, and repetition. You've been trained to equate self-preservation with selfishness. You've been conditioned to confuse setting limits with rejection. You've been told that ignoring discomfort in yourself is noble even when that discomfort is signaling danger, overextension, or repeated harm. And so guilt becomes a filter, a lens through which every choice you make is examined, often unfairly, by standards that are not your own. The danger of guilt is that it masks clarity. Wisdom whispers that restraint, observation, and strategic action are necessary. Wisdom recognizes patterns, respects limits, and understands cause and effect. But guilt transforms restraint into hesitation, observation into anxiety, and strategic action into more compromise. You doubt yourself not because you are wrong, but because you have been conditioned to feel that comfort and approval from others outweigh internal truth. Guilt teaches compliance disguised as morality. People mistake guilt for love. They believe enduring exhaustion, repeating forgiveness, absorbing blame, and tolerating manipulation proves devotion. And in that mistake, wisdom is buried, because true care does not demand self-erasure. True care does not insist on habitual sacrifice at the expense of clarity. True care does not confuse intervention with obligation or reaction with responsibility. But guilt convinces you that failing to act, even when acting perpetuates harm, is failure itself. Guilt is often amplified by repetition. The more times a pattern is tolerated, the louder the internal accusation becomes. You justify, rationalize, and repeat actions to quiet it, believing that compliance, overextension, or forgiveness will silence the feeling. But guilt doesn't demand action, it demands recognition. And the louder it gets, the more it pressures you to act reflexively instead of thoughtfully. The trick is that those reflexive actions usually reinforce the very patterns that caused guilt in the first place. Wisdom hidden beneath guilt requires discernment. It demands that you distinguish between obligation imposed externally and guidance offered internally. It asks you to recognize that your energy is finite, your choices are consequential, and repeated intervention can create harm even when the intention is love. Wisdom knows that saying no, stepping back, and observing consequences are acts of insight, not cruelty. Guilt obscures this by painting restraint as betrayal. The tension between guilt and wisdom is heightened by societal expectations. You are told that family comes first, that women in your household must be protected and assisted at all costs, that refusal is immoral. These cultural pressures amplify internal guilt, making every boundary feel like transgression, every pause feel like neglect, every act of self-preservation feel like sin. And yet, the very patterns that provoke guilt are often those that require intervention with clarity rather than habitual submission. Guilt can also manipulate perception of intent. You question your motives endlessly. Did you act selfishly? Was your help sufficient? Should you have anticipated the need? Every decision becomes a trial of conscience, and every response feels inadequate. Meanwhile, wisdom waits silently, unassuming, observing the repeated patterns, the overextension, the consequences that could have been avoided if guilt did not cloud judgment. People cling to guilt because it offers a semblance of control. Feeling bad can feel productive, actionable, meaningful. But emotion without discernment is ineffective. It convinces you that compliance equals morality, that sacrifice equals virtue, and that intervention, even when harmful, is necessary to preserve relationships. Wisdom, however, recognizes that restraint, boundary, and deliberate choice are far more potent than reactive, guilt-driven action. It knows that silence, observation, and strategic non-involvement can teach lessons louder than any enforced help. The insidious nature of guilt is that it amplifies doubt while hiding opportunity. Every yes given out of guilt reinforces dependency. Every overextension under the guise of duty confirms entitlement. Every ignored boundary teaches repetition, not responsibility. And yet, if you listen carefully, beneath the echo of guilt lies the clear voice of wisdom pointing to restraint, clarity, and the necessity of choice unclouded by external expectation or internalized pressure. Guilt feels like obligation, but wisdom feels like insight. Guilt demands action, often unconsidered. Wisdom demands awareness, often uncomfortable. Guilt presses you to act, even when action perpetuates harm. Wisdom instructs when to step back, when to observe, when to let natural consequence teach. And in the quiet between these forces, the choice becomes clear not by emotion, not by pressure, but by the steady recognition of what actually creates growth, responsibility, and truth for both yourself and the person you think you are helping. Letting go can be an act of clarity because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop interfering. People confuse involvement with responsibility, action with care, and proximity with loyalty. They reach, they rescue, they fix. Because the story they've been telling themselves about family, duty, and morality convinces them that movement equals virtue. But sometimes movement is distraction. Sometimes intervention is a mask for avoidance. Letting go strips away all illusions and leaves only truth, sharp and unavoidable. And that truth is clarity. Letting go is hard because it demands acknowledgement of patterns you don't want to see. It forces recognition that repeated efforts have not produced change, that apologies have been hollow, that promises have been temporary. Every time you intervene and nothing shifts, every time you act and the same behavior repeats, reality is whispering a message you've been too comfortable or too afraid to hear. Letting go is the first act of listening, the first acknowledgement that your energy has been misdirected and that continuation is complicity. People resist letting go because it feels like abandonment. They fear judgment, loss of face, and familial or societal condemnation. They imagine themselves cruel, irresponsible, heartless. But letting go is not abandonment. It is a recognition of limits. It is the awareness that control is an illusion, that influence has boundaries, and that you cannot force growth, accountability, or respect without cooperation. It is the hard lesson that presence alone does not create change. Repetition makes letting go necessary. When the same demands, excuses, and manipulations return again and again, it is no longer an opportunity for patience, but evidence of pattern. The mind and heart are inclined to hope that this time will be different, that a fresh effort, a better argument, a stronger commitment will finally work. But patterns are impartial. They repeat until the observer adjusts. Letting go is the conscious interruption of repetition, the refusal to participate in cycles that have proven destructive or unproductive. Letting go also protects your own energy. Every habitual intervention consumes mental, emotional, and physical resources. Each act of blind help is an investment in outcomes you cannot control. Every excuse you accept, every boundary you ignore, every repeated compromise chips away at clarity, resilience, and self-respect. By letting go, you reclaim energy and attention for areas where action produces meaningful results, where responsibility is shared, and where intervention aligns with reality rather than obligation. Letting go exposes truth that intervention cannot. It shows who takes responsibility, who adapts, who respects limits, and who manipulates dependence. It draws a line between those willing to grow and those content with patterns that serve only themselves. By stepping back, you allow natural consequences to emerge. You allow reality to communicate in a language that habitual interference obscures. You witness the effects of repeated behavior, unfiltered by your desire to fix, rescue, or manage. The discomfort of letting go is intentional. It forces confrontation with fear, guilt, and doubt. Fear that the person will fail, that relationships will fracture, that judgment will follow. Guilt that stepping back is neglect, irresponsibility, or lack of love. Doubt that your judgment is correct, that boundaries are justified, that disengagement is warranted. This discomfort is not punishment. It is the mechanism by which clarity is attained. It separates action from instinct, compassion from enabling, involvement from interference. Letting go is also a declaration of self-respect. It acknowledges that you have limits, that your role is finite, and that your responsibility ends where accountability does not begin. It demonstrates that love is not coercion, presence is not obligation, and care is not measured by sacrifice. By letting go, you redefine the relationship on terms of truth rather than expectation, on terms of consequence rather than habit, on terms of clarity rather than guilt. People mistake continued involvement for virtue. They believe that enduring harm, ignoring patterns, and sacrificing boundaries prove loyalty, morality, or love. But repeated interference often perpetuates dysfunction. It reinforces entitlement, enables manipulation, and obscures reality. Letting go, however, disrupts this cycle. It demands awareness from all parties. It forces recognition of responsibility. It allows natural outcomes to speak louder than imposed intervention. In stepping back, you illuminate patterns previously hidden by habitual interference. Letting go is courage disguised as inaction. It is the refusal to act in ways that perpetuate harm, the acknowledgement that some lessons cannot be taught for someone else, the understanding that presence without accountability is hollow. It is the first step toward clarity, the first acknowledgement that repeated effort without change is participation in dysfunction, and that true care sometimes means watching, observing, and allowing reality to unfold without your hand constantly shaping its reality. Outweighs intention because what you mean does not erase what actually happened. You can have the noblest motives, the purest heart, the strongest desire to do good, and still leave a trail of unintended consequences in your wake. People confuse intent with impact, believing that if they feel righteous, ethical, or loving, the result must reflect that. But reality doesn't negotiate with feelings. Reality doesn't care about your explanations, your justifications, or the excuses you craft to soften the edges of failure. It only responds to action and consequence, regardless of how morally sound your intention might seem. Intention can be dangerous when it's used as a shield. You can hide behind what you meant to do when outcomes are painful, harmful, or destructive. You can convince yourself and others that the act, not its result, is the measure of morality. But reality doesn't recognize excuses. Consequences are impartial. Patterns are unrelenting. People notice results far more than motives, and those results become the narrative that defines you, regardless of your inner reasoning. Intentions are often clouded by desire, bias, or emotion. You intend to help, but help without clarity can enable. You intend to protect, but protection without boundaries can suffocate. You intend to teach, but teaching without consideration can humiliate. And yet, intention feels comforting because it signals control. It feels like morality. It feels like progress. But reality observes the results, not your internal state, and it corrects misalignment with precision, not mercy. Reality outweighs intention because it measures effect, not effort. You can spend hours, days, years, striving to do the right thing, but if the outcome perpetuates harm, fosters dependency, or solidifies patterns of manipulation, your effort is neutralized or even inverted. People often confuse persistence with progress, action with efficacy, and generosity with transformation. Reality doesn't bend to narrative. It accumulates evidence. It reflects patterns, not excuses. Intention without awareness is invisible to consequence. You can act with the purest heart, but if you ignore patterns, disregard boundaries, and neglect observation, your acts can reinforce dysfunction rather than correct it. You may comfort, assist, or intervene, believing in the nobility of the act, while in truth, repetition embeds dependency, avoidance, and expectation. Results tell the story your intention cannot. Reality is relentless in that way, impartial and unforgiving to naivety. People often justify repeated missteps by clinging to intention. I meant well, they say. I tried to help. I only wanted the best. And the world nods politely, but outcomes are indifferent. Children grow dependent. Adults remain manipulative. Chaos persists. And you, exhausted, rationalize instead of observing. Reality doesn't negotiate. Results accumulate independently of your rationale, and patterns repeat until acknowledgement arrives. Intention can also mislead perception. You can misread your own impact, assuming that because you acted with care, growth occurred, lessons were learned, and harm was avoided. But reality exposes the truth over time. It shows how repeated intervention, however well-meaning, entrenches behavior, reinforces entitlement, and dulls responsibility. Intentions create a story you can tell yourself. Reality creates the score you must live with. The conflict between intention and reality is heightened when emotion intervenes. Love, fear, loyalty, and guilt all color intention, often distorting judgment. You act to protect, but protection enforces dependency. You act to teach, but teaching becomes interference. You act to help, but help perpetuates harm. And yet, emotion convinces you that results are secondary, that effort absolves error, that desire validates action. Reality does not conform to emotion. It simply unfolds according to the patterns established by behavior. Intentions can create false security. They make you feel virtuous while you continue patterns that reinforce harm. They allow you to ignore feedback, consequences, and repeated signals that something is off. Reality does not reward feeling. It rewards alignment. Action misaligned with consequence, even with the purest motive, generates friction, tension, and eventual correction. The world doesn't ask about your heart. It responds to the trajectory of your choices. People cling to intention because it's comfortable, protective, and moral sounding. It allows you to continue acting without facing the true effect of your behavior. It preserves self-image while outcomes quietly diverge from expectation. But reality does not. Funny thing about life, people love to talk about beginnings, the fresh start, the new chapter, that moment when you take your first step towards something greater. Oh, they cheer for you then, they clap, they smile, they say, "You got this." But then the road stretches longer than expected. The steps get heavier, the lights start dimming. And suddenly, those same voices, they get quieter. Some disappear completely. Others start whispering, maybe this isn't for you. Maybe it's time to turn back. You ever notice how people love noise? They need it, crave it. The chatter, the music, the notifications, the constant hum of voices telling them what to do, where to go, who to be. Noise makes them feel safe, like they're not alone, like they're in control. But then, then comes the silence. The kind that creeps in when the crowd is gone, when the music stops, when the calls go unanswered, and suddenly, all that confidence, all that certainty, poof, just a bad joke with no punchline. Silence makes people itchy. It makes them nervous. It makes them second guess everything they thought they knew. You ever see someone pacing the room, checking their phone every 5 seconds? Not because they're expecting anything, no, but because the quiet is pressing down on them and they hate it. The absence of noise makes them uncomfortable. Because without it, they have to sit with their own thoughts, their own doubts, their own fears. And that's terrifying. See, when you start something new, people love to make noise for you. They cheer, they clap, they tell you how brave you are. It's all so exciting, isn't it? And if you fall flat on your face right away, well, that's a story too. They'll talk about it, point fingers, maybe even laugh a little. But when you're in the middle of something, when the dust has settled and the excitement has worn off and you're just trudging forward step by painful step, that's when the silence sets in. And that's when the real test begins. You see, the silence, it isn't a punishment. No one's out to get you. No great cosmic joke being played at your expense. It's just part of the deal. 'Cause if you need noise, if you need applause, validation, constant reminders that you're doing fine, then you're not strong enough yet. Not ready. The silence is there to see who keeps going when no one's watching, who still believes when there's no proof, who stays standing when there's no one left to lean on. That's what separates the ones who make it from the ones who don't. Because most people crack under silence. They mistake it for abandonment. They take the lack of immediate results as a sign they were wrong. And so they quit. They turn back. They go running toward the nearest noise they can find just to feel safe again. But the ones who make it, they don't need noise. They don't need proof. They don't need someone holding their hand, whispering, "You're doing great, keep going." No. They just know. And that's the trick, isn't it? To be the kind of person who doesn't flinch when it gets quiet. To be the kind of person who keeps walking, keeps pushing, keeps moving forward, even when there's no voice telling them they're on the right track. Because here's the thing about silence. It doesn't last forever. But what you do with it, that decides everything. People think pain is the worst thing that can happen to them. Oh, no, no, no. Pain is just the opening act. It's loud, it's messy, it grabs your attention. Sure, I get it. But pain isn't the real trick. The real trick is what happens after the pain. When the screaming stops, the dust settles, and you're left standing there, looking around at the wreckage, wondering if you're supposed to pick up the pieces or just walk away. That's the real test. That's when you find out what you're really made of. See, people have this funny little habit. When life hits them hard, when things don't go the way they planned, they start asking the big questions. Why me? What did I do to deserve this? Where's my reward for all the good I've done? Oh, they love that last one. They think life operates on some kind of points system. You do a good deed, you get a gold star. You pray enough, work hard enough, suffer long enough, and poof! Your prize magically appears. But that's not how the game works, is it? No, life doesn't play fair. It doesn't hand out trophies for effort. And that's where most people lose it. That's when they start thinking maybe they've been abandoned, maybe they've been forgotten, maybe all those promises of something better were just lies. And that's when they make the worst mistake of all. They stop. They give up. They trade in everything they could have been for something safe, something easy, something that doesn't make them feel like they're clawing their way through glass just to keep breathing. But see, that's exactly why some people make it and some don't. Because the ones who make it, they understand something. They know the silence isn't empty. The waiting isn't pointless. The suffering isn't for nothing. No. This is the process, the breaking down before the building up, the tearing apart before the masterpiece. And most people, they don't have the stomach for it. They think if something is meant for them, it should just happen. But the ones who get through, the ones who survive the fire, they don't get there by accident. Because here's the part no one likes to talk about. If something big is coming, if something truly great is waiting on the other side, you think it's just going to show up wrapped in a pretty little bow? No. It has to be earned. It has to be proven. And how do you prove it? How do you prove you're ready for something greater? You survive the in-between. You keep going when there's no map, no guide, no sign that you're even moving in the right direction. You keep going when every part of you is screaming to quit. That's where the real difference is made. That's when people show their true colors. Because anyone can dream when it's easy. Anyone can have faith when the road is clear. But when the fog rolls in, when the answers don't come, when the whole world is whispering, give it up, it's over, what do you do then? Because if you stop there, if you walk away just because it got hard, well, then maybe you never really wanted it in the first place. Maybe you were just in love with the idea of winning, not the cost of it, because the cost is high. It always is. And most people, when they finally see what it takes, they decide it's too much. But the ones who don't turn back, the ones who keep moving even when they don't know where they're going, those are the ones who get the reward. Those are the ones who make it. People walk around thinking they know how the world works, like they've got it all figured out, like life is some neat little puzzle they just have to put together the right way and boom, happiness, success, peace, the whole perfect picture. But let me tell you something, that picture, it's a lie. A beautiful, shimmering illusion designed to keep you playing by the rules. But who made those rules? And why do people follow them so blindly, even when they're walking straight into their own destruction? That's the real joke. You see, people love to pretend they're in control. They set their little goals, map out their little plans, and convince themselves that if they just work hard enough, stay patient enough, suffer long enough, everything will fall into place. But what happens when it doesn't? What happens when they've done everything right, followed every step, obeyed every command, and life still kicks them in the teeth? That's when they start to crack. That's when the panic sets in, because they don't understand what's really going on. The truth is, the ones who suffer the most, the ones who seem to carry the heaviest burdens, face the hardest battles, live through the deepest betrayals, they aren't being punished. No, they're being prepared for something bigger, something greater, something that can't be handled by just anyone. But people don't see it that way. Oh no, they think if things aren't going their way, if life isn't playing nice, then something must be wrong. They start questioning everything. Why me? Why now? What did I do to deserve this? But let's flip the script for a second. What if all that pain, all that struggle, all that heartbreak, it wasn't a setback? What if it was a test? What if it was the only way to strip away everything weak, everything fake, everything that's holding you back? What if the very thing you're trying to escape is the thing that's going to make you unstoppable? That's the punchline no one wants to hear. People want comfort. They want guarantees. They want to know that if they keep moving, there's a prize waiting for them at the end. But what they don't realize is that the journey, the suffering, the endurance, the refusal to break is what makes them worthy of that prize in the first place. It's funny, isn't it? The way people beg for strength, for wisdom, for greatness, and then cry the moment they're given the challenges that will build those very things. They don't want the struggle, just the reward. They want the crown, but not the weight of it. They want the glory, but not the scars. And that's why so few actually make it. Because when the fire comes, when the storm hits, most people run. They run back to what's safe, what's familiar, what doesn't make them bleed. But the ones who don't, the ones who stand in the fire, who let the storm do its worst and still refuse to back down, those are the ones who become something more. Because real power isn't handed out like candy. It's not given to the ones who beg for it, or wish for it, or wait for it to fall into their laps. It's given to the ones who earn it, the ones who prove they can handle the cost. And oh, there's always a cost. Nothing great comes without a price. That's the part people don't want to accept. They want to believe they can skip the suffering, avoid the pain, take a shortcut to the top. But that's not how this works. That's not how anything works. So the real question isn't whether life is being unfair to you. The real question is, what are you willing to endure? What are you willing to sacrifice, to survive, to push through in order to become what you were meant to be? Because the ones who go all the way, the ones who refuse to quit, no matter how brutal it gets, you ever notice how people love to play the victim? Oh, they'll tell you all about how unfair life is, how they've been wronged, how the world owes them something for all their suffering. It's a funny little game they play, convincing themselves that their struggles are a curse instead of a gift. But the joke is on them, because the ones who really win, they don't sit around crying about the pain. No. They use it. They let it shape them, sharpen them, turn them into something unbreakable. You see, life isn't about what happens to you. It's about what happens because of you. And that's the part most people don't want to hear. They want to believe that everything is out of their hands, that they're just unlucky, that the universe is picking on them. It's easier that way. No pressure, just a sad little story to tell themselves while they waste away in mediocrity. But here's the truth. Suffering isn't a punishment. It's an invitation to rise, to transform, to become something more than the small, weak thing you used to be. But most people, they ignore it. They reject it. They'd rather stay broken than go through the pain of becoming whole. Because that kind of change, that kind of power, it's terrifying. People are funny like that. They beg for strength, but the second life gives them a chance to build it. They run, they ask for wisdom, but when the lessons come wrapped in pain, they want a refund. They don't want to earn what they're asking for. They just want it handed to them. But that's not how the world works. No one gets to the top without scars. No one becomes unstoppable without first being broken. And the ones who get that, the ones who understand that the fire isn't there to destroy them but to forge them, they're the ones who walk out of the flames laughing because they've finally figured it out. The world doesn't break you because it hates you. It breaks you because it needs you to be stronger. And the sooner you stop fighting it, the sooner you start using it. You see, people are obsessed with comfort. They want everything to be easy, painless, effortless. But comfort is a slow poison, keeps you weak, keeps you small, keeps you trapped in the same miserable cycle day after day, year after year. And all the while you tell yourself it's fine, that this is just how life is, that you should be grateful for what little peace you have. But deep down you know you were meant for more. So why don't you take it? Why don't you step into the fire and let it turn you into something greater? Because the truth is, the ones who win in this world, they aren't the ones who complain the loudest. They aren't the ones who sit around waiting for a miracle. They are the ones who decide that no matter how much it hurts, no matter how much it costs, they will not be defeated. And that's the punchline, isn't it? The difference between the ones who make it and the ones who don't. It's not luck, it's not talent, it's not fate. It's the simple, brutal truth that some people refuse to quit. Some people refuse to break. Some people take every bit of pain, every ounce of suffering, every betrayal, every loss, and they build something out of it. A new version of themselves. One that doesn't just survive the fire, but learns how to control it. Here's something they don't tell you. Life's not fair. Oh, you've heard that before, haven't you? Maybe from a tired old man shaking his head, muttering about how things used to be. Maybe from a teacher, a boss, someone who got tired of your complaints and wanted you to shut up. But see, they say it like it's a bad thing, like life's unfairness is some cruel accident. It's unfair on purpose. People spend their whole lives looking for balance, for justice, for some kind of universal scoreboard that keeps track of who's been good, who's been bad, and who deserves a nice, happy ending. But here's the secret. They're playing a game that doesn't even exist. There is no scoreboard. There are no rules. Some people start with everything, some start with nothing, and most of them never figure out that none of it matters. Because life doesn't care about fairness. Life doesn't care about right and wrong. Life only cares about who plays the game best. And, here's the best part, most people refuse to play at all. They stand on the sidelines, whining about how they should have had a better hand, how they deserve more, how the world has cheated them. They wait for someone, something to come along and fix it, to make things fair. But the ones who win, they're the ones who stop waiting. The ones who stop crying about fairness and start using it. Because unfairness? Oh, that's a weapon. It's the best weapon there is. People think it's a weakness, that it makes them powerless. But the ones who really get it, they see the truth. If life's already unfair, then you're free. Free to do whatever it takes. Free to stop playing by rules that don't exist. Free to let go of the idea that you deserve something just because you worked hard or because you're a good person. And that's the part that gets people all worked up. Oh, they don't like hearing that. They want to believe that if they just keep being patient, keep suffering, keep smiling through the pain, something, God, karma, the universe, something will come along and reward them. But what if I told you there's no prize at the end? No reward for being the nicest, for being the most patient, for taking the most pain without ever fighting back? What if the only thing waiting for you at the finish line is more of what you allowed? The world doesn't owe you kindness. It doesn't owe you respect. It doesn't owe you success. And the moment you really understand that, the moment you stop expecting things to be fair, to be easy, to be right, oh, that's when things get fun. That's when you stop wasting time looking for justice and start making power. That's when you stop asking for permission and start taking what you came for. But see, most people won't do it. They'll nod along, pretend they understand, but when the moment comes, when it's time to step up, to stop complaining, to take control, they'll freeze. They'll find some excuse, some reason to stay small, stay weak, stay exactly where they are. Because the truth is, most people like being powerless. Oh, they'll never admit it. They'll say they want change, say they want to win, say they want something more. But what they really want, they want someone else to do it for them. Someone to come along, take all the risk, take all the pain, and then hand them the rewards. But that's not how this works. That's not how it ever worked. The ones who win, the ones who make it, they're the ones who get their hands dirty. The ones who don't wait, don't ask, don't stop. The ones who look at an unfair world and laugh, because they know that means anything is possible. They know that the rules aren't real, that the limits don't exist, that the ones who really want it will always find a way. And the ones who don't, they'll keep waiting, keep complaining, keep telling themselves that someday, somehow, life will finally be fair.